now it's my pleasure to switch lanes and introduce Kamal Jadwani. Kamal, are you here somewhere? From Decimal Health. Hey there. Kamal is going to tell us a little bit on how to get into the US and succeed there. Kamal, the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Well, thank you so much for having me here. Excited to be, this is my second time in London. The first time was 48 hours, so finally enjoying the city a little bit. I live in Napa Valley, California, so not a lot to complain about, but it's really exciting to see a new city here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the US, and it's been an interesting day yesterday sort of hearing about digital therapeutics in Europe. Lots of similarities, which I was a little bit surprised by. I expected to come here and think, oh my God, like Europe is doing it completely differently, but it seems like the challenges are pretty similar across the board. The opportunities are slightly different, and so hopefully at the end of this 25 minutes, you'll get a little bit more excited about what we can be doing in the US for digital health. My personal background is as a primary care physician. I started my career several years ago leading digital innovation at a large and integrated delivery network in Boston, Mass General Brigham, used to be called Partners Healthcare. I spent about 15 years there leading digital innovation, thinking about the unmet needs of our providers and patients, and thinking about how digital health or digital tools could solve it, and was thinking about the forefront of some of the innovations happening there, like digital therapeutics and biomarkers and others. After doing that for about 15 years, I decided to sort of start to help companies on the outside be able to successfully sell and implement their solutions within provider systems, payers, employers, and pharma companies. And that's kind of how Decimal Health was born. In the last 2.5 years, we've worked with over 60 companies thinking about how do you get traction and implementation within provider systems and payers, as well as employers and pharma. And digital therapeutics are a huge sort of portion of what we do there. Obviously, the team is formed by a lot of people who've spent a lot of time in pharma and provider systems, so we kind of have that sort of deep knowledge. But in the last 2.5 years, have helped about 10 companies achieve FDA breakthrough status, for example. Have done a lot of regulatory work in helping companies achieve the baseline that they need to be able to commercially be successful. Have participated in a lot of evidence generation. So I was a principal investigator back in the day when I was working at a hospital system. And so really understand what it takes to sort of take a business concept and figure out the clinical and the economic evidence required to make it successful when you're selling to physicians and payers. And then really think about how do you collect real data through our network and through data sources that are available in the United States. So what I want to spend time today talking about is sort of 3 key things about if you're a European company or if you're a DTX company and you want to be successful in the United States with digital therapeutics, is starting a little bit with what's the current state, what are we really doing in DTX, how much of this is real versus how much of this is hype. I get asked that a lot, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'll talk a little bit about who's buying DTX in the United States, and then how do you think about charting your own path to success if you were to launch a digital therapeutic solution in the United States. So getting started with sort of what's the current state and what's the real. Obviously, sort of the definition, the way we define digital therapeutics in the US is basically an evidence-based therapeutic that is able to help you prevent, manage, or treat disease. We use that pretty broadly in the US, so even some management solutions can be considered digital therapeutics. There's a way in which we break that down and we classify digital therapeutics, which I'll get to in a second. We also think about digital therapeutics being used as something that's independent of other therapeutics, so independent of molecules, or as a companion to molecules or in combination with molecules. And the way we define those 3 differences is if it's independent, it can be a standalone therapeutic that's given to patients in some way. If it's a companion, it means that it's given with a molecule, but that they're sort of independently sort of helping each other out. And then combination is where we say the molecule plus the digital is better than either just digital alone or molecule alone. So that's kind of the other 3 different ways we think about it. In the last sort of 10 years or so, there have been a lot of new digital therapeutics being launched in the US. And as you can see, based on the therapeutic areas, psychiatry wins. There's a couple reasons for that. But psychiatry, cardiovascular, addiction medicine, things like that, we have seen more traction in the market in terms of what has been approved and what has been commercialized as a digital therapeutic in the United States. The growth has been interesting. So it's a 24% CAGR if you think about where digital therapeutics are in 21 and what we expect them to be in 26. A lot of these numbers are being driven right now by pharma. So we're not making billions of dollars on provider implementation. It's not yet anyway. But a lot of this is being driven by pharma. A little bit over 40 approved FDA approved digital therapeutics since 2017. A lot new ones in the last 3 months or in the last quarter that haven't been accounted for here, but sort of still gives you an idea of sort of what the numbers look like today. And in April of 2020, the FDA relaxed some of its regulations around psychiatric disorders and some of the DTX solutions in psychiatry, which is why you kind of see a little bit of a upswing in the number of psychiatry products in the market right now. This is sort of like a little bit of a timeline of some of the big, hypey kind of like products that came out of the market. Starting with obviously Pear's Reset, started in Q3 of 2017, one of the big blockbuster releases that happened, and everyone was like, oh my God, what is this? And since then, we've had a lot of other products and a lot of other companies come out with successful digital therapeutics. And by successful, I mean they've either gotten FDA clearance or they've gotten reimbursement or both, or have some meaningful traction and some meaningful collaborations and partnerships in the market to be able to commercialize. So these are some of the ones that we talk about a lot. Pear gets talked about a lot. There's multiple products that Pear has now in its portfolio. Akili was one of the favorite childs in the beginning, where it's like, oh my God, there's a video game for for ADHD, and that was something that was pretty unique. And it was really fun also trying to launch that in the provider spaces, because pediatricians had to be like, there is a video game, and I'm going to tell my patients to use a video game instead of not use a video game. So, it was really interesting the way they launched it and the way it was accepted by the provider market. But it kind of talks a little bit about sort of how some of these are so unique that it actually takes a long time for people to accept it, sit with it, and then start to actually use it in clinical practice. So as we think about the kinds of digital therapeutics that exist right now, we kind of break digital therapeutics mainly into prescription DTX and non-prescription DTX. And then there's this whole market that's kind of like the wellness apps, right, which is not technically digital therapeutics. And sometimes I hear the word digital therapeutics used for solutions that don't exactly have a therapeutic effect, right? So there's a little bit of that confusion in the market, mostly because people want to call themselves whatever they want to call themselves as it relates to the ease of adoption with providers or with reimbursement. But there's some clear definitions. So when we think about wellness apps, we think about more managing disease or preventing the onset of disease. When we think about digital therapeutics, we think a little bit more towards the treatment side or the therapeutic side, right? So that's kind of one key way to think about it. The difference between prescription and non-prescription can be pretty minor, but a lot of that starts from clinical evidence. So the idea is that a prescription digital therapeutic, which is a physician actually prescribing a therapeutic to a patient, should have the highest levels of clinical evidence, should have really good clinical efficacy, should have some good economic efficacy. They should have prospective randomized control trials. They should have very large sample sizes. So the bar for evidence on the prescription DTX is the highest. It's a little bit in the middle for non-prescription DTX, and then obviously it's low for wellness apps. FDA does want to regulate anything that's considered a prescription DTX, so that's another thing. If you do not get FDA regulation, you maybe end up in a little bit of the non-prescription DTX thing, even if you do have some evidence. So something to think about. And then obviously patient access sort of varies based on, a wellness app can be in an app store, and if you put in enough marketing dollars behind it, you can get it in everyone's hands, versus the prescription DTX needs to be prescribed by a physician, so the physician becomes an enabler or a gatekeeper, however you want to see it, for that solution reaching the patients. The pricing also, a prescription DTX has many, many more modalities for commercialization, many more modalities for monetization. So obviously those can end up becoming some of the more expensive products and some of the higher monetizable products. Non-prescription somewhere in the middle. Obviously wellness apps end up sometimes being free or fairly inexpensive. And then obviously the time to market is highest for prescription, but they're also eligible in the United States for reimbursement. So if you want reimbursement, then you kind of go down that whole prescription route, and it is higher time to market or longer time to market, but a bigger benefit at the end of the day. I wanted to give you an example of how in the same therapeutic area, there are different versions of these apps with different kinds of claims that could go across all of these different things, right? So starting all the way on one end, on the wellness apps, right? There is a product in the market called CBTI that is a wellness app for improving sleep habits, right? So their claim is we improve sleep habits for patients with symptoms that they experience for insomnia. Right, so that's kind of their claim. But as you start to get into the DTX world, Sleepio, which is a non-prescription DTX, they say they improve poor sleep and manage the condition, versus Somryst, which is cleared as a prescription DTX, they say they treat patients with chronic insomnia. So you see the indication changing, right? The wellness side says we improve your habits. The non-prescription side says we improve your poor sleep and we help you with management. The prescription side says we treat the condition, right? And as you can see, the seriousness of the claim and the seriousness of the evidence required sort of increases in that way, right? So the evidence for Somryst is like, after using our tool, 40% patients are no longer meeting clinical criteria for insomnia, which basically means that I have treated 40% of the patients that use my app. So that's a really serious claim and a really high level of evidence that is required for you to be a prescription DTX. But if you look on the other side of it, CBTI doesn't even have its own studies. It just says there is research in the market that says CBT can help with sleep, right? So you see the difference in the level of evidence required to be able to make some of these claims and how it works. And now the middle, Sleepio, has some RCTs. And they look at things like, can you fall asleep faster? Can you sleep a little bit more? Do you have better energy? But those are just sort of some indicators or some leading indicators for what might be considered that your sleep is getting better or that your insomnia is getting cured. But they don't make claims around the fact that someone is now cured of it or someone does not meet diagnostic criteria. So that's kind of the difference of how you frame whether your product falls into one of these categories based on the kind of evidence you're collecting, the kind of endpoints you're measuring, and sort of the kind of claims that you make. And obviously, all of that goes hand in hand then with what your regulatory status is. So Somryst is actually FDA cleared. The others are not. The pricing and reimbursement, Somryst is about $900 for 9 weeks, and the others are cheaper, less than half. And then in patient access, the Somryst requires an actual prescription. The others do not. So everything kind of follows based on the claim you make, the evidence you generate, and what you want to say in terms of like what outcomes you've measured. All right, so having said all of that, there are still challenges with, there is more money in digital therapeutics now being poured in for development. There is more ways you can monetize digital therapeutics, and yet there are issues now that, the market has to sort of come to bear with. So the first one is, even despite a lot of these studies happening, today, 75% applications for medical devices get rejected by the FDA. People don't really think about that, but a lot of these applications get rejected because they do not show substantial evidence. It is really important when you're thinking about the FDA that you have good evidence to back up the claims that you're making. And then once you have the evidence, people still don't understand how to implement it into the clinical workflow. So if you're going to give me the evidence and you're saying Somryst can help, reduce insomnia in 40% of the patients who use it, but tell me how to use it in clinical guideline. Am I using it independently? Am I using it with a molecule? Am I using it when someone's first diagnosed? Am I using it after someone's diagnosed for 5 years? Am I using it in men or women? What age group? When companies don't think through the clinical guidelines, physicians don't know where it fits into the treatment protocol, and that lends itself to not getting used, right? So then you're surprised, it's like, why is no one using it? Well, you haven't given me the protocol and the guidelines to do it. So the key takeaway for that is like, you need good clinical evidence for FDA approval, but the clinical evidence in your clinical study is not enough to get adoption. You need to actually think about how you insert it into my treatment protocols and into my guidelines. You need to work with associations. You need to figure out where it fits into the rest of the solutions so that as a physician, I have an idea of where it goes, right? So that's sort of a key takeaway in thinking about do your clinical studies, and that's really important, but do not ignore real-world pilots. That's really important as well. Another thing that companies do is they spend a lot of time and money on clinical evidence and don't really think about economic evidence, right? So only 10% DTX companies today have published evidence around economic benefits. What that does is that it ties the hands of the payers because they're like, You don't have data on economic evidence. I don't know how to price this. I don't know how much to reimburse this. I don't know what value you're creating, right? So really thinking about clinical evidence is important, but always be thinking about economic evidence and what do you want to do for proving that you're actually creating an economic lift. And where is that economic lift coming from? Is it coming from improved clinical outcomes? Is it coming from reduced utilization? How does someone measure the economic benefit of using your product? And that's important if you want to think about reimbursement. And then the third thing is, there is a gold rush almost of companies wanting to go to pharma because the pharma deal sounds so amazing and the press releases sound really good. And I promise you it's very helpful from that perspective and from a valuation perspective. But the reality is most of these deals are predicated on adoption. Right, so they'll sign a $20, $30 million deal with you and they're like, oh yes, and like a lot of it is payable when we start to get adoption. No one's getting adoption because people just sign the deal and then they're like, oh, I haven't actually thought through the next step of it, which is how do I make the sale to the physician on the ground who's now going to prescribe it to a patient? And have I thought about that value creation opportunity? Have I thought about the incentive that goes there? So really thinking about what do you do on the business model side? And really the answer to that is like, there is no single answer on the commercial side. I wish I could give you a pill that says, just do it this way and everyone wins. It's not true. So depending on your product, on your claim, on who you're going after, on who you're selling to, and what your level of evidence is, and all of those other things, your commercial sort of success path is going to look different. There's also a lot of companies that are now thinking about, well, should we be just product or product and service? Should we have our own delivery network? There's a lot of new innovations and ideas coming out, and all of them are valid, but it needs to be valid for your particular situation and your particular customer group. So I'm going to move on to business. I'll take questions at the end. I see a couple of hands. I'm going to move on to business model, and this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about who's buying. So we understand now digital therapeutics, what's going on in the market, what the US market for digital therapeutics looks like, but who's really buying? And right now, there are about 5 key customer segments that you can commercialize through in the United States. So starting with direct-to-patient, you can easily put something on, you can sell it to patients directly. One trick on the direct-to-patient side is if you're going to do that, make sure that you're HSA, FSA eligible. These are pre-tax dollars that we put into a program that we can use for medical expenses like buying something out over the counter or like paying for things that are not covered in our insurance plan. So usually you're able to do that and create enough of an incentive that people will actually use their FSA dollars to pay for you. Health systems, obviously you can go to health systems and provider systems and commercialize through them. You can either go through the hospitals or the clinical departments and create the right sort of incentive structure there. You can obviously sell to pharma. We've had a lot of conversations on pharma yesterday, so I won't go through that a lot in detail, but you can think about the pharma side of the world, and you can think about companion, combination, or standalone DTX that is being commercialized through pharma. Payers are starting to play a role, and we've seen some successful engagements with payers and DTX companies, and then employers, where employers will most likely commercialize non-prescription digital therapeutics to offer to qualified employees. So lots of ways to get into the hands of the patient. So thinking about, obviously, direct-to-patient goes directly to the patient. You can sell it on Facebook. You can do ads. You can do social media, whatever that might be. On the health system side, a lot of health systems have direct access to patients. So they have programs like population health management programs where they can create a list of patients. They can say, here's my patients that are eligible. I have a case manager. I'm going to give it directly to the patient. And so that can happen. Or health systems can commercialize it through a prescription digital therapeutic through their provider. Pharma does the same thing. Most of pharma deployments actually happen through providers, and so most of those have to be either prescription digital therapeutics, or if they're non-prescription, they're usually in the companion area with a lower level of claim. And then similarly, payers can commercialize it through providers as a prescription digital therapeutic, but sometimes they do have direct programs available as well as maybe social benefits or other things that they can commercialize to patients directly. And then obviously employers will go directly to the patients, in which case, it's probably not a great idea if you have a prescription digital therapeutic to put it through the providers unless you have your own provider network, because that becomes a barrier to adoption. Some examples of companies that have been doing this, Kaya calls itself a non-prescription digital therapeutic. They have been going direct to consumer, but they've also been going through health systems, and they have some really interesting payer and employer affiliations as well, and relationships that are going on. Pear obviously started with Sandoz, with pharma. That relationship has ended now, but they have some really interesting relationships with payers. They recently announced one with sort of Mass Health, which is a really big number of lives that went under care. And so that's one to be watching. That's also arranged as a value-based arrangement. So that's something to be watching. There's obviously pharma. So Click Therapeutics has done something with Otsuka. That's just an example. There's many, many more on the pharma side. And then Akili is taking a very different approach now where they're building their own physician network. And they're saying, refer the patient to me for ADHD management. I will use my own physicians to prescribe the drug or prescribe the molecule and then sort of manage the data and manage the outcomes of it. So that's a slightly different approach, and they're taking the very specific prescription digital therapeutic approach for that. So the summary on this is like which one of these pathways is good or bad really depends on your product and your claim and who you want to go after. Obviously, the direct-to-patient side, low level of evidence required. Patients are not looking at your RCTs. They don't really care about that. If you have a little bit of evidence, you can probably get going pretty fast. Obviously, the customer acquisition cost is really high. Health systems is really interesting. That is where if you have good evidence for economic benefit and clinical benefit, that is where you should have your best fit. So you can get into value-based contracts, you can get into patient engagement contracts. There's a lot of different things you can do there. There's also codes now that can incentivize physicians through reimbursement to be able to prescribe these out there. But evidence requirements are higher. Physicians actually care about the evidence you have and will actually read your paper. They won't just say, oh, you got a paper in JAMA, I'm not even going to read it. That's a different customer segment. But then the sales cycles are much more complicated as well. So with larger health systems, you need to get IT on board. You need to get clinical on board. You need to potentially get your value-based people on board. So it's a complex sales cycle, so it takes time. And the evidence required is much higher. Payers are getting into the game, so they're large and they're established and they give you a really good distribution channel. But on the other side, it is, once you sell to payers, it still doesn't mean anything unless and until you're able to sell to the providers. So it's a two-step sale process again, and that's something to keep in mind with payers. Payers aren't necessarily something you can commercialize with directly. You can get that to sort of help you get into the provider network. And then, sorry, that was pharma. With payers, we can think about the benefit being direct coverage and payment. So you can go to a payer and you can say, here's the benefit, here's the economic outcome, I can create a direct benefit. So maybe give me a direct coverage, maybe give me a code that we can use. And payers have been known to do that. So that kind of greases the wheels for you a little bit. But then again, sort of the level of evidence required for cost savings is very high. So you need to have enough studies done where you can show that the cost benefit to the payer and accruing to the payer is going to be significant enough for them to play ball with you. And then employers, again, you know, the benefits for employers is improvements in productivity, retention, healthcare cost savings, especially if you're thinking about self-insured employers. But then again, utilization among employees could be a challenge. So sometimes employers will say, we'll give you some dollars PMPM, but a lot of that ends up being on success and utilization for DTX, and utilization usually ends up being low unless you're working really hard to get those lives under care. And then finally, reimbursement, and really thinking about what can we do to incentivize the use. I think, you know, it was really interesting that the talk in the morning talked a lot about how do you get people to be reimbursed for their time? How do you get people to be reimbursed for the effort they're putting in? And that is really true in the United States as well. As you think about the 5 different channels that I talked about, the bar is the highest if you want to go to providers directly, right? So providers really care about reimbursement, and that is where there is a high level of skepticism on the evidence, but also if there is no reimbursement, they're not going to play ball with you. So something to think about. And the way we think about how do you create a good reimbursement strategy, a good reimbursement strategy goes beyond a CPT code, right? A CPT code is an element of a good reimbursement strategy, but you want to think about a reimbursement strategy more holistically. You want to think about how you're measuring your patient outcomes and how you're demonstrating those outcomes. You want to think about the role you play in the decision-making process for the clinical utilization, right? So like, how is your data being used in the clinical decision-making process, and how do you monetize that piece of it? How do you reward for outcomes, or how do you reward yourself for outcomes? So if I'm doing really well on, let's say, addressing a disease condition for a patient, what is the value of that disease condition for the health system, and how can I get a portion of that? And then how do I deliver something that's personalized, that's something health systems cannot do today? So really putting it all together and thinking about how do I take these different elements and construct an overall reimbursement modality that is going to benefit the health system and you, right? So it's never about finding the one CPT code. That's usually pretty underimagined. Right now, there's a few reimbursement modalities available through payers. So there's the medical benefit side of it, where you think about CPT codes, creating a new code, using existing codes. There's a lot of different ways to slice that. And Bioformis is a good example of having used a lot of different CPT codes to cobble together a really interesting reimbursement package that they offer you when they use your product. Or you can think about a pharmacy benefit. So very much like a molecule, a digital therapeutic can be considered a pharmacy benefit, where I can send an order to a specialty pharmacy, and they will deploy the drug the way they would have deployed a molecule otherwise. I have an example of that coming up. But those are the two sort of higher level modalities for reimbursement available. There's also newer ways to think about payments, right? So you can stick to this, or you can start thinking about, okay, I'm creating enough value, I'm going to share in the value with you if you're a value-based organization, right? So I can get paid for outcomes. Outcomes can be really simple, right? Something like, I will get you 80% engagement, or we will get patients to get at least 6 sessions on the app, or something that is meaningful enough that we know that will create the outcome that we want, right? The second thing is paying for value, so an actual outcome. I will get your A1C down by 2 points, or I will get your patient under 7.5 A1C. If I'm able to do that, you pay me. If not, you don't, right? So there's value, and then there's outcomes. And then now, recently, we've started seeing a lot of dollars around pay for adherence. This is specifically for pharma companies, where they are monetizing the fact that not only can they give you the molecule, they can give you a digital product that's going to guarantee a certain level of adherence. And that plays really well with providers and payers, because once you're able to achieve a therapeutic level of adherence, at that point, the clinical outcomes are almost guaranteed. So a lot of people are now saying, hey, only pay me if my molecule, if my digital tool is able to get you an adherence level of a certain number, because then everyone wins. The pharma company wins, the provider and the payer win, the patient wins, and obviously then the digital therapeutic company should get some benefit out of that. So really, when you think about money and reimbursement, you want to think holistically. Are there portions in all these different buckets that I can cobble together to create a reimbursement in package that makes sense for me and for my end user? The Pear Therapeutics recently got a HexPEX code, and that is a specialty pharmacy code. So the way the workflow works is the provider will write a prescription. The prescription goes to a pharmacy. The pharmacy dispenses the prescription or the order, and it is done whenever whenever the order is made. It doesn't require a physician on site for that. This went effective this April, and we're still figuring out if this was successful or not. But the code has been released, and there's a couple other companies that followed the same exact process and got the code approved as well. And there's a couple of big companies that didn't get the code, so it's still work in progress. But I wanted to show this as a way to say, there is a real code now. There is actually a way in which CMS is now incentivizing you to be able to go down this pathway. The last thing I'll say about reimbursement is, if you think about sort of the in-person care that a physician is providing, it is usually about provider billable time, right? You're going to spend maybe 2 to 3 hours in a 10-week therapy session seeing a patient, and that's what you monetize today. With a digital tool, we kind of go on the other side of it. We can start to get data from patients, and we can start to see the trends within a patient's journey for so much more of that journey in those 10 weeks and monetize a lot more of that. And that's something to think about when you're thinking about creating and constructing a reimbursement package. So I know I'm a little bit over time, so I'll skip the FDA and get to the last piece. Okay, do I remember my slides? Okay. So in summary, if you were to think about how do you construct your own pathway for success? How do you really construct your own journey for your product, right? And there are 6 key components to think about, and you think about it in the right order. You think about what's the product design? What am I actually constructing, and am I constructing an experience that is going to be engaging and efficacious at the end of the day? And really thinking that through. Then you think about the business model, which is sort of who am I selling to, what is my channel, what is my customer segment, whatever. How do I line up my regulatory strategy to align with the customer segment? And I'll show you in a minute what that looks like. What is the evidence I require to generate, so that I'm required to generate so that I can meet the goals of the product that I'm creating for the customer segment that I'm going after, for the regulatory pathway that I'm looking to achieve, for the claim that I'm looking to make. How does that evidence then tie into reimbursement? And do I need reimbursement in the form of codes, or do I need reimbursement in the form of sharing value? And then how do I distribute? And this is the last piece that people don't really think about, is how do I get this into the hands of the end users where I'm going to actually create the value? And in a lot of cases, that means the actual patient. So charting your journey all the way through to the patient is really important, and thinking about distribution workflows all the way is kind of how you think about getting success on that. Just as an example, depending on who you're selling to, what channel you're selling through, what your benefit is, and how you're sort of monetizing it, you may or may not require FDA clearance. You may or may not require a lot of clinical evidence, and you may or may not require economic studies, right? So really thinking and being strategic about how you do it. And then also you can create a journey in phases, right? Phase 1, I may not have evidence, I may not have regulatory approval, but I'm going to monetize it in this way. Phase 2, I get my regulatory approval, I monetize it a different way. So really charting that out and thinking about what your requirements are based on where you are in that journey. And then finally, just always thinking about the 3 sort of key issues as we think about DTX adoption and engagement. The first one is people need to think about the last mile, and a lot of people don't think about the actual physician and patient adoption, right? Always thinking about the fact that a physician adoption is a 2-step process. You can sell to a health system, you can sell to a pharma company, you still have to go and sell to the physician so that they can prescribe to a patient. So don't think about just the value creation at the organization level, you always have to think about the value creation at the actual physician-patient interaction. And a lot of people kind of don't think about that. In some cases, that just means having a really good customer success team, right? Someone who's in front of the physician, reminding them what's going on and reminding them the value of how to use the tool. Evidence generation, so really thinking about evidence not just as a clinical efficacy part, but economically as well. So really thinking about what that means, and then thinking about implementation evidence, right? So not just controlled clinical trial, I work really well, but like how do I work in a real world setting? And then do I need real world evidence to show people that I'm efficacious even in that setting? And then finally, really thinking about customer segmentation. A lot of companies go broad and they're like, I'm going to go after pharma and payers and providers, and I'm going to create a team that can do all of it. That's really hard because each segment requires a lot of work and a lot of investment. So thinking clearly about the segment and the subsegment and then creating a strategy behind that is really effective. So really thinking about making sure that you're sort of measuring twice and cutting once when you start to build a team around customer success and around customer segmentation. Well, that was all for me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks so much, Kamal. No, we have no. Okay. Thanks so much.